Hi, everyone. Welcome to the February 22nd edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I am David Aragona here with my usual co-host Greg Mulkowski, and we are looking ahead to another weekend that features an interesting derby prep. That is the Grade 2 Rebel Stakes at Oaklawn Park. We, of course, are going to handicap the entire late pick 5 sequence at Oaklawn on Saturday, which includes the Rebel Stakes. That is the 11th race on their 12 race card. The pick 5 goes 8 through 12, 4 stakes races in the sequence, including 3 graded stakes, the Honeybee and Early Oaks prep, the Razorback for the older horses, Carousel for some filly and mare sprinters, and then things end, as is often the case at Oaklawn, with a maiden special weight event. Just luckily this week, it's an open company maiden special weight, not one for the Archiebreds, but still not an easy way to end this sequence. And as is often the case at Oaklawn, Craig, this is not an easy sequence to handicap, I think, once you get outside of the Rebel. And I guess it really depends on your opinion in that centerpiece race, because there's a big favorite. It's going to be a very short price. If you're against that horse, I guess your ticket could get a little more expensive. If you're not, maybe that's a race where you go thin in. But the other 4 legs in this sequence, not so easy to navigate.
No, not at all. And like you said, maybe some people might not even think the Rebel's easy. I'm sure we'll get to that when we talk about it. I did the smart thing for me to temper to help my enthusiasm. I did the maiden race first this time, and I was happy to see it was not Arkansas breds. Not that I have anything against them personally, but they are often very tough to handicap. This one seems a little bit more manageable, but it's a tough pick 5, as they always are at Oaklawn, because you just don't really ever get a small field there anymore.
Yeah, I don't want anybody to misunderstand me. I do love a state bred program. I think there might have been a misunderstanding about that last week. But no, I have nothing against the Arkansas breds. It's just those maiden special weights, they can be tough ones, especially with the large fields. And this sequence does end with one of those. The Timberlake is that big favorite of the Rebel that we were referring to. And I think a horse you have to make some decisions about in this sequence. We'll handicap it when we get there and discuss Timberlake and whether or not he's a horse that you can trust enough to lean on. But that really is sort of the key decision to make as to how this sequence will be structured around that race for you as a handicapper and a bettor. Well, Craig, let's start the handicapping, because I think there's a lot to get through, and the last couple of forecasts we've done have run pretty long, so we should probably dive right in this week. The 8th race is the Carousel. It is for going 6 furlongs for the fillies and mares. Interesting morning line in this race, and I just did get the morning lines for this one, because you got a couple of horses that are the substantial favorites on the line in the number 7 Mucho Macho Girl and the number 8 Zeitlos, who don't exactly have stakes credentials. They're both coming out of allowance optional claiming wins, fairly impressive ones with some nice speed figures, but they're not the kinds of favorites that you would typically see in a race like this. I just think it's a race that didn't come up that tough for the level, so I guess the public is expected to go to some up and covers.
Yeah, I saw the morning line and I was a little surprised at first, but as I dug into the race, I can't really say that I disagree all that much. I haven't looked at the buyer speed figures, but I imagine there's not a lot of difference. These two have a pretty big speed advantage on most of the field, or at least several in the field. For a 9-horse field, I almost said just. At Oaklawn, just applies. It's pretty small for some of their races. But I think we have 4 horses who are listed 20 or 30 to 1. So it really kind of narrows it down. And this is a leg I don't want to spread too much in personally.
Yeah, I'm not saying that I disagree with the morning line at all. I think that those 2 horses, Mucho Macho Girl and Zeitlos, are likely to be the 2 favorites. The public just tends to gravitate towards those horses that have the perceived upside. And while Zeitlos has obviously run more than Mucho Macho Girl, I mean, she seems to be coming in to this race in her career form. And kind of interested to get your take, Craig, which one of these you might prefer if you just want to use them in equal strength, because they both seem like they have the credentials to be competitive in this race. I mean, Mucho Macho Girl, I think, is the one that you might project could have a little more upside, because she's only run 4 times and she's been so visually impressive in her last couple of starts. All of her victories have come at fairgrounds, and I wouldn't say she's beaten too much in the last couple of races. She's been short prices for a reason when you look at the fields that she's faced. But she was geared down last time. Obviously, did not have to be overexerted to beat that field. And she's actually the half sister to a very nice horse. Her half brother is Hoist the Gold, who recently won the Cigar Mile and actually ran pretty well in the Pegasus World Cup. But this filly appears to be a sprinter right now, and Zeitlos is coming off a nice performance at Oaklawn in the slop. So I think they are the two horses to beat, Craig, but I wouldn't necessarily want to take very short prices on either one of them.
No, I'd agree. If I had to pick one of the two, I'd probably pick Mucho Macho Girl just because of the slop that you mentioned for Zeitlos. She took a big step forward last time on the TimeformUS speed figures after being a basically mid-90s kind of machine there for a while. And I wonder how much of that was the slop, or maybe she just figured it out. But if I have to pick one, I would lean a little towards Mucho Macho Girl, but I'm in a similar camp. I don't totally trust those two. There's some other horses that caught my eye a little bit. The one who's really a little bit I would use as like a C is I'm the Boss of Me, who's drawn on the far outside. She has speed figures that could win this race. My issue with her is she is a true need the lead horse, and I'm not sure that she's going to get the lead in here, but the outside post could help. She's probably going to be a decent price, so I don't want to totally dismiss her. The other horse that I'm interested in that should be a price is drawn on the inside, Adeline Julia. She's a horse who also has some back figures that put her right here in this field. But unlike the others, she's a horse who's coming from off the pace. I'm not sure how the pace is going to develop in here. I could see a scenario where it could get pretty quick, but I think she's had some tough kind of trips the last few outs. She's got a lot of blue pace figures. She tried a mile a couple times, even winning at a mile going wire to wire. And I just think if there's a horse that's not one of the two favorites that could get the job done, she's the most likely.
Yeah, I think you highlighted two of the most interesting alternatives. Now, I don't know if there's really going to be such a gap as there's shown on the morning line, like 7-5 and 8-5 on the 7 and 8, as opposed to 10-1 on each of Adeline Julia and I'm the Boss of Me. I don't think I expect to get that high a price on either one of those two, because from a speed figure standpoint, Craig, I mean, they fit right in line with the two favorites. It's just, I think the two favorites have been winning recently, whereas the other two have not. And that's really the only difference. But I mean, they faced a good horse last time in Alva Star, both Adeline Julia and I'm the Boss of Me. I'm sorry, Adeline Julia did. I'm the Boss of Me is coming out of the Zeitlos race. But I think that the horses that finished behind Alva Star, you don't want to just dismiss, because she's a really quality horse. And I know that didn't come up the fastest race, not the fastest race that Alva Star has ever run, but I do agree with you that if there's one horse that you could upgrade due to the trip coming out of that race, it would be the number one, Adeline Julia, because to me, she just looked a little uncomfortable with the kickback. I mean, when you watch the backstretch run, she was almost climbing a little bit, just awkwardly striding, and then she got shuffled a bit into the far turn. It just seemed like she didn't like being so far back and taking that muddy kickback. And once Florent Giroux got her out into the clear, she was trying at the end, but that just wasn't really a race that you could close into. So I don't want to be too hard on her, not even for her race 2 back, when even though she won going the mile at Delta Downs, I don't think she's a horse that really wants to go a mile. And in her prior sprint races, it's not like she had to be some deep closer. She was a horse who had tactical speed, could sit a stalking trip going 6 furlongs in the past. So if Christian Torres can be a little more aggressive on her this time from the rail, I think she could sit the right kind of trip, stalking along the inside or potentially from mid-pack. So I think Adeline Julia makes a lot of sense. And for me, a fair price on her is closer to 4-1, and she could be a better price than that. So I think she makes a lot of sense in here. I agree. I'm the Boss of Me. It's a little harder to predict her working out the perfect trip, because she doesn't seem like a horse that really wants to pass in her races. She just kind of, attains a position and sort of runs along there and maybe lets somebody buy her at the end. But she's got plenty of TimeformUS speed figures that put her squarely in the mix. Arguably, she's the horse to beat on speed figures. It just is a matter of whether or not she's going to run her top number. Maybe the excuse for her last race, Craig, is twofold. Number one, it doesn't look like she's ever been a horse that really relishes a wet track. When you kind of go through her past performances, she's run some stinkers on wet tracks before. So maybe that sloppy going just didn't really agree with her. And also, I'm somebody who's of the opinion that February 3rd, especially as you progressed through the day, that was the day they ran the Southwest, the rail was the place to be, especially right down on the rail. And I'm the Boss of Me was four wide the entire time. Zeitlos was also outside, so you could say the same thing about her. Maybe those efforts are a little better than they look. So I think that's just something to consider. I wouldn't say it's, the kind of pronounced rail bias that you sometimes see where horses can't possibly win on the outside. It just seemed like there was a slight edge to riding that rail at Oaklawn, especially as the track continued to take rain throughout the day on February 3rd. So those are some factors I'm considering on those two horses, but I just think they're going to be better prices. So I wanted to upgrade them slightly, particularly that number one, Adeline Julia, who for me would be the top pick.
Yeah, me too. And you described the trip perfectly. I have in my notes, I expect her to get kind of that pocket trip in behind the speed horses and just finding room and making a run late. And I'm totally with you. And the boss. I'm the boss of me. You don't have to go too far back in her PPs to find a loss on a wet track at 2-5 at Delaware Park. And sandwiched between pretty good speed figures. So yeah, she definitely has some excuses. And tracks like we saw on Southwest Day, there's usually never enough evidence when it's raining throughout the card to really mark it as a race that was inside or speed favoring or anything like that. But I tend to agree that as we got on in the day, the rail was getting better and better.
And I just want to make one further comment about the pace of this race, because we've been talking about how maybe I'm the boss of me might not be fast enough to get forward. And when you look at the TimeformUS pace projector, it looks like she's actually got pretty good position outside of two speed horses. I think the wild card in the pace projector, though, is the number 5, Sarah Harper, who's a big price in this race, but she can be a little bit of an all or nothing type with regard to her early speed. And sometimes they take her back. Sometimes she doesn't break well. But when she does break well and she's got her mind on running in the early stages, she's really fast. And we saw that last time when she sped off to a 2-length lead through a very fast opening quarter in that race that was won by Zeitlos. And she obviously paid the price for it later. That was her first start off a layoff. So, I mean, potentially her speed could be intensified this time. Maybe they'll just ride her differently. But she's one who, if she wants the lead, she'll get it. It's just a matter of whether or not she's got her mind on getting there.
Yeah, and Backyard Money, also a big long shot in here, is really fast early too. So there's a reason that he's shown up front as well. He is shown up front, unlike Sarah Harper. So as I said, no notation here, but I won't be surprised if things get pretty hot in this race.
Yeah, no, exactly. And as fast as Backyard Money is, she was the one that was 2 lengths behind Sarah Harper in the opening quarter last time. So it's just Sarah Harper's a tough horse for the pace projector to capture is kind of the point I was making. But it does feel like if those two are aggressively ridden, it could set it up for more of a closing run, maybe for the horse that both Craig and I like. Let's move on to race 9, getting these race numbers straight. It was the grade 3 Honeybee is the second leg of this sequence. 1 mile and a 16th is the distance for these 3-year-old fillies in an Oaks prep race. And I should mention, Craig, thankfully, after some wet weekends, both at Oaklawn and then last week at Fairgrounds, and I think thankfully for you, because I believe you're going to be heading out to Arkansas this week, the weather looks pretty nice for Rebel Day. So I don't think we're going to have to deal with one of these wet tracks, hopefully no track biases. So that's all good news. And I think it's worth mentioning that with regard to the Honeybee, because as we discussed, the horse that won the local prep for this, the Martha Washington Band of Gold, I think you sort of have to make a decision about what to do with this horse, because she earned a pretty fast speed figure for that victory, and it was a decisive win, winning by almost 3 lengths. She closed into that pace and looked like a horse that we hadn't really had hints of that she was before, as I put that a little awkwardly. I mean, she's just a horse who hadn't run that fast on debut and really was no match for today's rival West Omaha or some other fairgrounds-based runners in the Untappable, but it seemed like she took a huge step forward last time. Was it the wet track? How else do you explain it?
Yeah, it was Ken McPeak Day in Oaklawn Park that day. He won both of the big races, if memory serves. I'm of the mind that she won that race at, I think she paid $50 or something that day. It was a huge price. She's going to be probably a heavy, it's not the favorite, but she's going to be close to favoritism as the second choice. I don't trust that race. As you said, it was a track that maybe it was the rail was getting good that time of day, and I just don't trust it. It's one of those where she took a huge speed figure jump, and I'm just going to make the the stand that if she beats me, she beats me. It's one of those, I missed the wedding, I'm not going to the divorce, or however you want to phrase that analogy. But I tend to like some others in here, and some of them actually come out of that same race. A couple of them in there, the 4-horse. How do I pronounce it? Battled a long way. Neon Beach, I guess is how you say it.
Let's go with that. Yeah, it sounds good.
Yeah. Neon Beach was a horse who she was in between horses. She was chasing the leader, who's also in this field. We'll get to her in a minute. And it looked like she was kind of done turning for home. Unfortunately for her, Band of Gold kicked off the rail, looked like she was going to blow right by, and she kind of did. But she really held tight in that photo for seconds. So I don't want to totally dismiss her. And I don't want to dismiss the horse that led for a long way that day either. Tapet Jen Alley. She got a bigger TimeformUS speed figure than the winner. Part of that has to do with the weight shift, but also with how the pace played that day, and how Band of Gold was near the back and didn't run all that quick early. So I just think there's some better value to be offered in here. It's kind of funny. We've talked about it this long, and I haven't mentioned the horse who is going to be the morning line favorite. She's the kind of horse, West Omaha, the 6 horse in here, who normally I'd want to be against. There's several in here who have better TimeformUS speed figures than her, but I'm not really against her like I would normally want to be. She's definitely one I would use on my tickets. Her speed figures aren't that far off the others. She ran a 99, where the race rating in here is a 103. But she's coming out of races where she hasn't really had a lot of pace to earn a speed figure that's big. And she's been improving every time out. So even though she's the favorite, I would use her as opposed to Band of Gold, who I don't think is going to be much more of a price. And I got to see it again, and I'm willing to toss her.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see how they bet this race. I don't know if Band of Gold is going to be as low as 2-1 after she was such a big price last time. That seems like a really big shift for a horse like that. But I do think it's worth discussing that Martha Washington the way that you did, Craig, because you got to make some decisions about that race in handicapping this, even before you get to a horse like West Omaha being 4 against that one, because it did produce kind of an odd result, the Martha Washington. For me, I don't think that Band of Gold's victory is a total fluke, because I did like some of the things I saw from her on debut, even though that was a slow race. She did run pretty well that day, was kind of on her left lead, didn't look like a horse that had it all figured out yet, and clearly did not figure it out in the next start, where she was probably a little overmatched at Fairgrounds. But it did seem like the light bulb went on last time. Now, maybe that was just the trip that she got, because she did get a very good trip. The pace was honest, and she was outside in the stretch. I mean, Brian Hernandez was clearly a jockey that was aware that you wanted to save ground on that track, and he was on the rail for a good 5.5, 6 furlongs of that trip, and then got her to the 2 path at the quarter pole, and then angled out wider at the 8th pole to get up and win that race. And clearly that trip benefited her. But still, she finished off that race strongly. She looked like she wanted every bit of the distance that she gets again here. So I don't think that it was some total fluke. I still don't want to take a short price on her here after, as you said, I mean, we kind of, missed the opportunity last time. My problem, though, is I don't really like anybody else out of the Martha Washington. I hear you on Neon Beach. She was never inside that day, and she was chasing an honest pace, but I don't know if I really get the sense that she's a horse that wants to go a mile on the 16th. I know that she broke her maiden going this far, but she just kind of strikes me as a horse that maybe is a little limited with regard to distance. And as for Tapet Janali, again, she was involved in that pace, but she really rode the rail every step of the way. So I don't want to upgrade her too much. And when you look at her speed figures and her past performances, I mean, you do wonder where that improvement came from for her as well. So the Martha Washington for me is a race that I just don't have a whole lot of confidence trusting the form coming out of. And I probably do like Band of Gold the most of any of that trio, but I wanted to look elsewhere in this race. It sounds like to some extent you did as well. And West Omaha, who is the horse to beat, I don't think there's any other way to view that she's going to be a substantial favorite in this race. she really hasn't run that badly in any start. I'm not going to hold that loss to Alpine Princess against her two back. Alpine Princess really had all the best of it that day, setting her own pace, and West Omaha was finishing better across the wire, just a difficult situation where she couldn't quite make up the ground. And then last time out, it felt like she really took a step forward mentally. She was a little more engaged. I thought she got a very good ride from Luis Saez, who just sort of kept after her every step of the way. And she is one of those horses that you do have to ride for most of the race to really get the best effort out of her. And Luis Saez is a great fit for those kinds of horses. So hopefully Christian Torres has watched the replays or gotten some good tips from Brad Cox, because it doesn't look like this is the easiest horse to ride. But she does have some ability. I think that the form of the last race was somewhat flattered when Perfect Shot came back and was third, and what was probably a better race than this, and that Rachel Alexandra last week at Fairgrounds. So West Omaha, not saying anything too clever. I think she's the most likely winner of this race, and she'll be on my tickets. There's one other horse, though, that I'm more interested in at a price, though, Craig. Before I get to that one, though, I mean, is there anybody else that you want to mention in this race, or did I kind of cover those major contenders out of those two races?
No, I think you covered them. There was one other horse I wanted to mention. Hopefully, I'm not stealing your thunder, because I actually like this horse a little bit, and that's Alice Beach, drawn to the inside. If it is the horse you like, you can cut me off now.
No, keep going.
Okay. I just think she's probably better. She's coming off a layoff. She won first time out. Didn't run the greatest speed figure. Didn't do very well in the spin away at Saratoga. But when she stretched out the two turns, I kind of liked what I saw. I mean, she didn't run all that great. She finished third, beating 6 lengths after setting the pace. But those were some pretty decent horses that finished in front of her. And I just think she's a horse coming off the layoff who is one who is eligible to improve. If she improves that speed figure, a point and a half a month, she could be right there. She has a good post, and we haven't really talked about the pace. I could see the pace getting pretty hot, and I could see her tucking in behind. I think her hand got forced in that race at Keeneland where she found herself on the lead. I don't think she really wants to be there, and I could see her getting a much better trip in here.
Yeah, she's not going to be on the lead in this race, especially when you make the decision to ride Julian Leparoux on this kind of horse. I think that's the intention, to take her off the pace. I don't know what to do with her, because I did like her last year when she started her career. I thought her debut was a really nice effort. I know she got some pace to close into, but she wasn't that far off it. I thought she was very game to win that day over Life Talk, and her spin away really wasn't that bad. I mean, she lost contact with the field early, but she was really running on at the end. I guess what I don't know, Craig, is if she's just a closing sprinter, because for Alcibiades, it was fine. I know it stepped forward from a speed figure standpoint. She didn't finish off that race the way that I really wanted to see. I mean, she almost got caught for third after getting what I thought was a pretty good trip up until that point. I mean, that was a race where it didn't seem like there was any speed on paper, and I thought they made a really savvy decision with Flavien Prat to go to the front, and it almost ultimately just didn't work out. I mean, she was 16-1 and they got a piece of it in a grade 1 race. But she was a vet scratch from the Breeders' Cup after that. That was a race they were training for, and she was one of the many vet scratches that weekend. Now she's coming back off a layoff. I watched a couple of her workouts. To me, they were sort of sending me mixed signals. One looked good, one looked not so good. So I wasn't really sure what to do with her. If she's a price in this race, I could totally get using her. The horse that I was actually referring to that I'm interested in is the one bookending the other side of the field, the number 10, Midshipman's Dance. And this is a horse who is going to be stretching out. So she's definitely got some questions to answer from a distance standpoint. And I think I remember we did the forecast that week, Craig, when she debuted, and I think we liked her on debut for, at the time, Robertino Diodoro's assistant. I thought she ran really well that day. Muddy racetrack, never had great position on the track, was wide around the turn, came into the stretch looking like she had lost momentum going so wide, but she really continued running and maintaining her stride through the wire to get up to win that day. I know it was not a fast race, but to me, she was much the best on that occasion. And then she came back in that Mockingbird and earned a much faster speed figure, beat some horses that have since come back and actually improved their numbers a little bit. So I think that legitimizes the performance. And watching her sprints, to me, she just stays on like a horse that is going to go longer. Looking at her pedigree, I know she's by Midshipman, who you probably think of as more of a sprint sire, but on the dam side, it's all two-turn pedigree. Her dam won the Remington Park Oaks. She's produced a couple of route winners, multiple route winners at that. It just feels like there's definitely been intention to eventually stretch this filly out. And she's getting to try it here. We'll see. It's a big jump up, and it's a tougher race. It's a lot to ask in just her third career start against a graded stakes competition. But I feel like she's going to fly under the radar a little bit from a price standpoint. Diodoro is not the kind of trainer that takes money in these situations. And it's just kind of watching replays at a physical thing. This just, to me, looks like a big, strong filly that can do it. So she's got to step up, but I think she's going to be the right price to find out.
Yeah, I've got no issue with her at all. I mean, the distance could be a question, but you laid out a good case. The post is a little bit of a concern, but it's not like she's going to be 7-2 in here. She probably is going to be that 12-1 morning line. So, and it's, one thing you said, her debut was kind of slow. I mean, she ran a 90. We're only talking about a race rating of 103 for the Honeybee. And sometimes I forget that myself when I look at these fillies, and they're just not running as fast. So the jump up to a 97 was a nice improvement. And I could easily see her jumping up to just a logical progression to put herself in the mix here.
Yeah, I mean, Craig, at the end of the day, West Omaha has never run a triple-digit TimeformUS speed figure, and she's going to be probably even money in this race. So I do think in that situation, you want to keep an open mind. I like what I've seen from West Omaha. I think she might have further improvement in her. But you're taking a pretty short price to find that out in a race where she probably does have to run a little better to win. So I just think you always want to keep an open mind in those situations. Let's move on to the next leg of this sequence. Race 10 is the Grade 3 Razorback Handicap. This one going a mile on the 16th. Same distance as the Rebel and the Honeybee we just talked about, but this one for the older males. And large field signed on here, very competitive field. This is a really difficult race to get wrap your head around. There are just many ways to go in here. What I do know, Craig, is that I'm not thrilled with the horses that are short prices on the morning line. And I'll admit, I don't know how they're going to bet this race. I could see it going a lot of different ways, but I don't want Ain't Life Grand, who I think is the morning line favorite at 7-2. From a speed figure standpoint, he does kind of stand out. He's run fast numbers, run them fairly consistently, but he's coming off a substantial layoff, and we've seen this horse come off similar layoffs twice, actually twice at Oaklawn. They've both resulted in poor efforts. I think you've got to be really concerned this horse might just need a race.
Yeah, I actually looked up his trainer. I think it's Kelly Von Hemmel in the formulator. He's not really a guy that does well off a layoff. The ROI was less than $1 on horses coming off this kind of race. When I just looked up stakes races, he's never done it in a graded stakes, but when I looked up stakes, he tried it 7 times, 0 for 7, including a couple of them, as you note, were I think Ain't Life Grand. There was at least one of them. So yeah, I don't know if this horse is really going to wind up being the favorite. I'm not knocking the morning line maker here because it had to be an extremely difficult race to make the morning line. But if we're starting with the morning line favorite, I'm with you. I'm not a big fan at all of this horse in this spot.
Yeah, I really don't know who's going to be the favorite in this race. I think it could be the number 8 Magic Tap. Probably if I was doing the line, I might have gone in that direction, though it's really difficult to make that decision just due to connections, because Steve Asmussen, I think everybody sort of knows at this point, he's having a very strong Oaklawn meet, especially recently. He's just been winning races in bunches. And Magic Tap, I mean, he's got some races from last year that would make him pretty tough in here, particularly that Pennsylvania Derby, where I'd kind of forgotten how well he ran that day. He was chasing the pace, held on to be 4th in a race that came up very fast, won by Saudi Crown. And I know he was a little disappointing next time at a short price ending his season at Churchill Downs, but I mean, he came back and fought really hard to win that allowance race off the layoff, and it's very possible he could have a step forward in him. So he's not my top pick, and I think there are other way better value options in this race, but he's one that I could see attracting some support.
For sure, and I haven't dismissed him at all. He ran, as you said, that Saudi Crown race. The Pennsylvania Derby was his best TimeformUS speed figure. He regressed a little since then. Maybe that figure is a little inflated. We've seen some horses not come back to run back to that. But I actually liked what I saw from him last time. He kind of changed his style. All of his good races before had been either right up or on the lead. This time he was able to rate in behind and make up some ground in the stretch. He turns back a little bit. I don't know if that's going to hurt him. He's been running a mile and an eighth almost exclusively. So I worry maybe it will be just a little bit short, but he is definitely one I'll have on my tickets. But like you, he wouldn't be my top pick.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. He does feel like a horse that is just that grinding type who would want some longer distances. So maybe the mile and 16th is more of a question than I was originally considering for Magic Tap. Craig, as we get beyond him, I mean, I'll just throw out a couple of horses that interest me a little bit. The number one, Seize the Night. You might remember I liked him too back when we talked about that Tinsel Stakes, and he didn't get a bad trip that day. I just don't know if he was ever in the best spot, sort of between and behind horses the entire way, and some others just got the jump on him. He was never winning that race, but I think he finished a little further back than maybe he had to. And then he came back last time, and I thought he ran really well in that fifth season. Promise Keeper just got loose on the front end. I think you do want to note that was a race where the flow was significantly changed when that sprinter from New York, Durante, blew the start, and he was expected to be the leader. And I think he basically went to his nose at the start, and it completely changed the complexion of that race and allowed Promise Keeper to just control things on the front end. But I thought Seize the Night actually ran really well to be finishing best of all at the end of that race, and a mile and a 16th, it clearly is a distance that works for him. He's run well at Oaklawn in the past. He drew well towards the inside with Christian Torres. I just think he makes a lot of sense in this race, and he's the kind of horse going out for connections that aren't going to take so much money that he's going to be everyone's pick in this race.
Yeah, I actually like him. He would be my top pick in here. I say actually, like that's a big surprise. As you know, I'm a fan of the inside post in these Oaklawn two-turn races. I think saving ground is important there. He had it tough last time in the slop and made the best of it. I mean, when you said that horse went to his nose, Promise Keeper, a horse who always does his best running on the front end, was able to get a clear lead, and he was still making up ground late on that one, going just a mile. We haven't really talked about the pace in this race. It's one the pace projector is projecting a fast pace, and some of that's because of the 13 horse field size, but there is some real speed in here, and horses like Promise Keeper, Speed Bias, who doesn't necessarily always have to be on the lead. But when he's not, it's because the race is fast. So when he's a little bit off the pace, the fractions are going to be hot. And the 7-horse U.S. Army, who's a little bit of a long shot in here, he almost always goes to the lead, including lately anyway, including in a sprint race where he set red fractions in an allowance race at Remington going really quick. So I won't be surprised if the pace heats up quite a bit in here. For that reason, I don't really like Promise Keeper at all. And I can just see Seize the Night getting a really great trip riding the rail in behind those speed horses.
Yeah, I don't like Promise Keeper at all either. I'll be interested to see how this pace develops. I wouldn't say that I'm sure it's going to be a torrid pace, because I mean, most of the horses that are shown towards the front end are sort of that versatile speed stalker type where they can be on the lead. They don't need to be on the lead. So I'll be interested to see how the jockeys play this one heading into that clubhouse turn, because it's a large field, and often with some of the speeds drawn towards the outside, there is impetus to get a little aggressive and ride them to be forward. So we'll see how that works out. But I agree. I mean, of all those speeds, Promise Keeper is the one that I would want the least. Talking about some other horses in this field, Craig, we had spent some time last week talking about the number 11 Notary, who was entered in that I believe it was the mine shaft at Fairgrounds, and obviously scratched out of that race. And Money Supply, who had just beaten him two back and probably ran just as well, if not maybe a little worse than Notary in that race, came back and won. And you wonder if that was the right call to scratch out of that race and run here instead, because he drew post 11. And this arguably is a deeper field. I don't know if it's a stronger field overall, but it's a very deep race in terms of contention. So, I mean, you wonder what was the better spot for this horse. Obviously, he's had success at Oaklawn, and he's been in great form recently. So I get it, wanting to run out of your, coming back to Oaklawn. He's actually based at Fairgrounds, but wanting to run here. He's just a horse that can make his own good trip because he's got that nice running style where he can be a stalker, but he's perfectly comfortable settling in mid-pack. And I just loved the way he traveled in that last race. I know it was muddy going that he obviously handles, but I mean, he just moved up so sweetly along the inside. I mean, it looked like he could take over at any time. And once Manny Escobar let him run up into that position alongside the leader around the far turn, he just waited alongside that horse for him to get the cue to go on. And once he did, he opened up very impressively through the lane. To me, this horse is just coming into this race in great form right now, and he's going out for connections that are not going to take that much money. So he's definitely on my radar as one to use in this spot.
Yeah, if you switch the post, he would have been my top pick in here. I mean, yes, he could work out a good trip given his versatility that he's displayed. But at the end of the day, you'd much prefer the 1 to the 11. But outside of that, I have no knocks. As I know we talked about on the Pace Cast, we had talked about money supply, and you mentioned he may have scratched into a tougher spot. As I was looking through the PPs, I don't know that it's really tougher. It's just the post that's making it harder. Because a lot of these other horses in here, they have some real questions. So I think it's kind of a similar quality field, just a tougher post. And I've got no problem with Notary. I was going to use them last week, and I will definitely use them again this week. Because, as I said, despite that 11 post, there is some speed in here. He's pretty versatile. I could see where he breaks well and, is sitting 4th or 5th and get to be too wide.
Yeah, I say this is a deeper spot, Craig, because in that race last week that we were handicapping, there were just a lot of horses I would never bet that I had no interest in. And I think we kind of gave that vibe when we were handicapping it. There were just, you go through that field and it was just a lot of has-beens that we were not thrilled about. And at least in this race, I had a lot of trouble eliminating horses. I mean, as I go through, I could see a lot of horses winning this race. So I think from that point, there are many more contenders in this race. And maybe there's not one horse that's any better than the likes of Money Supply or Best Actor that we saw last week. But I mean, there are just a lot of horses that are around that similar quality. I mean, I don't think that either of us are a fan of him, but I mean, a horse like Octane comes in with some of the highest speed figures in this field from Florida, and he's obviously got to transfer his form to a new circuit. But I mean, he was game last time. I know he lost at 1-2, but I mean, that was a decent effort for him in the Sunshine Classic. And he's not my cup of tea in this race, but I just think the presence of horses like that, or horses that have run those speed figures, this makes it a really difficult race.
Yeah, it does. I don't particularly like Octane, the horse who beat him when he was a favorite in that Florida bred race, came back to get beaten, albeit he ran okay that day. Lure him in, ran a decent second with a lower speed figure. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of Octane. But yeah, I agree. There are some horses. I mean, what do you do with speed bias? He's a horse who on TimeformUS arguably has the best speed figures in the field. He doesn't run them all the time. The issue I have with him is that he just doesn't win. I mean, it's been a horse who hasn't won in quite a while. I think he was 2 for his first 4. Now he's 2 for 16. But I think he might get overlooked. So I'm not going to leave him off my tickets either. Another who draws inside, could get a good trip, is actually turning back, just like Magic Tap is. Most of his races have been at longer distances. The time he ran a mile and a 16th was not the best trip you're ever going to see for a horse. So I don't want to totally dismiss him either.
Yeah, maybe he's finally going to figure out how to win one of these days because, like you said, I mean, he's got the credentials to be very competitive in a spot like this. It just feels like over and over again, he looks like a major contender in his races. He takes money and he just doesn't get the job done. He was 3-5 last time, and he could only manage to finish 5th against the field that it looked like on the class drop he was supposed to handle. So he's not my kind of horse. But I understand. I mean, maybe this is the time he gets ignored at the windows and actually proves us wrong. So, I mean, he's one to consider. I started to look at some other horses at bigger prices, Craig, because to me, it feels like that kind of race where you can get creative. One of them is the number 12 Escapologist, who obviously has finished far behind Notary in a couple of starts recently, but he dropped so far out of those races. It's not like either one featured a pace that really was suitable to a horse to come from as far back as he was trying to. And maybe this is a race where the pace really does heat up. I'm not convinced that's going to happen, but there definitely is the possibility. And Escapologist, I mean, he's got some credentials to be competitive with a race like this. He obviously beat Magic Tap 3-pack in the allowance race where Magic Tap disappointed. And since coming to Oaklawn, he's just caught a couple of muddy tracks and gotten going way too late. But now he's getting the switch to Brian Hernandez, who seems like he's getting a lot of live mounts from Ken McPeak lately. And maybe he puts him right on the rail and tries to save ground in this race like he did on Southwest Day with a couple of horses. So he's one that is going to be a big price in this race that I could see getting a big piece of this. If I'm looking at some more long shots, how about a horse like the number 6, Midnight Rising, who only ran in the dirt once last time, beat actually a pretty good field, Sun Thunder, who I think was making his first start since the Kentucky Derby that day. Horses that have come back out of that race and actually improved a little bit. I mean, you look at a horse like the number 13 Ballsy all the way on the outside, and some horses that are in the race that he was coming out of actually ran in the race previous that Midnight Rising won. So I think it just validates the form of that race. And I thought he ran well to win. He got a good trip along the inside, stalking, but I mean, he can come from further back as he's shown on different surfaces in the past. And maybe he's just a horse that needed to be on the dirt all along. And now he's third off the layoff, so we could see better from him. He's one with upside that's probably going to be a big price once again in this race. So, I mean, just making the point that I could see a lot of different scenarios playing out in here.
Yeah, I'm with you. Personally, I couldn't use Escapeologist on the win end. He's never really run fast enough, and he just drops right out the back. But if the race melts down, I could see it. But, I mean, I don't want to go crazy and have a $250 ticket. Midnight Rising, hey, anytime we're talking about a 30-1 shot, there's going to be some question marks. His one dirt race came in the mud. But he did it the right way, and he ran the best speed figure he's ever run. So I would prefer him to Escapeologist. But you make a good point. There is a lot of different ways you could go in here. I'm going to play it using Seize the Night and Escapeologist as A's, and then just probably fill out as many others that I think could win that I can afford.
I think you mean Seize the Night and Notary, right?
Yes, I did, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I even started to look at OP Firecracker talking about long shots because when I was watching that race that Magic Tap won, from a trip standpoint, OP Firecracker is kind of the horse you wanted out of that race because he went wider and was making a late run after getting held up in traffic. He's just, I mean, he's another horse that doesn't win that often and a little hard to like based on his prior form, but maybe that's a reason to be more skeptical of Magic Tap, that he wasn't that impressive, at least for me, winning a race over a field that looked like they were a little inferior to him. So difficult race. To me, this is the most difficult race in the sequence, and I'm going to be looking to spread a little bit in this one. All right. On to that Derby prep. Race 11, the Grade 2 Rebel. $1.25 million purse here. I'm a little surprised that this didn't attract more of the high-profile 3-year-olds on the Derby trail. I was convinced that somebody would look at that, the way the track was coming up for the Risen Star last week, and say, you know what, let's wait for that softer field at Oaklawn. But nobody did. That Risen Star field held together, and we just are left with a Rebel that features Timberlake and everybody else. I mean, there are some horses in this race that have promise coming out of allowance and maiden wins that still have upside, but from an accomplishment and speed figure standpoint, Craig, I mean, Timberlake just stands out in this field.
He does. I mean, he's a horse that ran 115 in his last 2 races, including the Breeders' Cup Juvenile when he was a well-beaten 4th. That was a fast race. He had run a 113 when he broke his maiden at Ellis Park, I think it was, and he's just done very little wrong, except maybe lose to better horses a couple of times, or horses that got better trips, if you want to talk about the hopeful. He's clearly the horse to beat, and I wanted to make some cases to try to beat him, but I couldn't really come up with any. When I look at it and I see the TimeformUS power picks, and I see a horse like Just Steel as the second choice, and I went through and tried to make a case for some of the other lightly raced horses in here. I see a horse like Northern Flame, who's 5-1 on the morning line. Personally, I don't get that at all. That makes him the third choice. I would be shocked if he's actually the third choice, but it just shows that, to me, this race was really tough once you got beyond Timberlake to come up with some other opinions. And the more I went through the race, I just wasn't able to really come up with any. The only horse, I guess, if I was going to use the second horse, it would be the horse drawn in the far outside post, just because he has better speed figures than most of the others, and he's really not as exposed. He's trying 2 turns for the first time. Not sure if that's the greatest thing for him, but it's just a race where I had a hard time coming up with any other alternatives to the favorite.
Yeah, I think that's Time for Truth, or you're referring to. And yeah, he's one of the 2 horses in this race that has speed figures that put him within hailing distance of Timberlake. The other one, obviously, is Just Steel, who ran some nice figures in both the Smarty Jones and the Southwest. Personally, for me, Craig, I mean, just to sort of wrap up Time for Truth, visually watching his races, he just gives me pure sprinter vibes. I mean, just physically, he looks like more of a compact horse. He runs with his head up in the air. To me, he just looks like a fast horse that wants to sprint. And I get trying this race with him, but drawing post 13 with all their speed in here just seems like a tough trip is coming for him. So I couldn't get to that horse. But I mean, just circling back to the ones that have the figures, I mean, Just Steel, I think he's a talented horse. I don't really have anything against him from an ability standpoint. I think he probably is the second best horse in this race. Do I think he's a horse that is going to ultimately have anything to say about the Kentucky Derby result? No. I mean, he doesn't strike me as a 1.25 mile type. But maybe he continues to do okay in these prep races just because he's finding himself in spots where he can be effective. And I thought Just Steel ran very well in that Southwest last time. If you're of the opinion, like I am, that the rail was really the place to be by the time they ran that Southwest, you're supposed to like Just Steel a little bit in this race because he was 3 wide around both turns, made the first move at the top of the stretch to take over before Mystic Dan sort of got shot out of a cannon up the inside in the lane. And Just Steel held on pretty well to be second, even though he was well beaten by the winner. So I think that he is a legitimate contender in this race. That said, going back to Timberlake, he's just hard to be against. When you go through this field as a 2-year-old, he was running numbers that are faster than those 2 alternatives that we just talked about, and faster on 3 different occasions in his last 4 starts. I mean, like you said, I mean, the one time that he didn't run a speed figure that towers over this field, it was in the Hopeful, where the pace worked against him. He got rank. That was his last start with blinkers for a reason. I mean, it mentally didn't seem to get all there that day, and still finished second despite doing so many things wrong in that race. So there's no denying that he's a horse of real talent. We saw it all come together in the Champagne. To me, that was no sloppy track fluke. That was just how good this horse is. And we've seen the Champagne come back as a legitimate race. And, I think people were disappointed with his Breeders' Cup. But looking back, Craig, I thought he ran just fine in that Breeders' Cup Juvenile. Actually ran pretty well in that race because the pace did not materialize. He was, I think, further back than you would have anticipated that day. I think he didn't break as sharply as, I mean, he didn't break badly, but he just didn't break on top. And they sort of made the decision to take him to mid-pack. And that was a Breeders' Cup Juvenile that looked like it had more speed on paper than materialized. I don't think people expected fierceness to be right on top of a 47 and change half that day. And Timberlake just got rank. He didn't want to go that slow. He just refused to settle. And after that, he was wide. It just took away from his finish. But he still only got beat by a length and a quarter by Locked and less than 2 lengths by Muth, who are considered to be 2 of the top 3-year-olds right now. So I just think Timberlake makes a ton of sense in here. I've watched his workouts. He's always been a star in the mornings. I mean, he's an excellent workhorse, but he really seems to be coming into this race just absolutely thriving. He looks like, I mean, he looks as strong as a horse can look in the mornings coming into this race. And there's been no evidence of getting rank like you sometimes saw last year watching his workouts. So hopefully he's taken that mental step forward. And he just seems like an extremely likely winner of this race. And I'm somebody who likes to knock favorites, likes to get creative in spots like this. I just couldn't get there in this Rebel. I think Timberlake's going to win.
Yeah, I'm of the same thought. And don't get me wrong, I have nothing against Just Steel. I've just always had the impression he's more of a sprinter type. I think he'll do better if he turns back. He's run well, but it's not like he's really contended late in those races. And I just think the horses in behind him. I know Mystic Dan came back to romp in the Southwest, but he didn't really run much in that Smarty Jones. And most of the horses who have finished behind him just haven't really done a whole bunch. So I just don't want to spend a lot of my ticket on Just Steel when I really think Timberlake is the one going to win the race. I don't really have anybody else to talk about. I mean, I thought about maybe trying to take a flyer on Carbone. I mean, after all, he was 9-5 in the Southwest, but I had the feeling going into that race, he might be one that doesn't really want to go this far. I know he won an allowance at a mile over not the strongest field, but I just get the same impression that I think they're just giving him one more chance, but I don't think there's a lot of optimism there. So, like I said, way back when we started talking about this, when it was hard for me to come up with anybody else. And at the end of the day, Timberlake will probably be a single for me.
Yeah, Carbone, he might be a little better than his Southwest, but I mean, in retrospect, how good were his first two races really? I mean, I know he was visually impressive each time. That allowance race he won two back, it hasn't necessarily come back as the strongest affair. And when I go back and watch that race, I mean, you mentioned Northern Flame, and I agree. He's probably not going to be 5-1 in this race. He seems like more of a 12-1 shot. But I mean, he had a tough trip in that December 31st allowance race, and I think he arguably would have been a lot closer to Carbone at the end if not for it. So I think Carbone maybe was a little overrated going into that Southwest, and there's plenty of speed in this race, so he might not get that trip that he really wants, is setting a moderate pace up front. And the two alternatives that I was looking at, Craig, are the two Ken McPeak trainees drawn alongside each other in the starting gate. I mean, Northern Flame is one of them. Again, he's not going to be 5-1, so I don't care about that too much. He just got a perfect trip last time in that optional claiming win. Now, maybe he's a horse that didn't run that fast because he doesn't like a wet track. And I think if you look at his street sense at the end of his 2-year-old season, there's an argument that maybe he's just not a wet track horse and he won that race last time in spite of it. Still, I think he'd have to run better than even the best we've ever seen of him to be competitive with Timberlake or even beat a couple of the others that we've mentioned. So he wasn't really for me. I considered giving another chance to Common Defense because I liked him a bit in the Southwest, and look, he was never going to win that race. He got a decent trip overall. He was a little keen early and ultimately wasn't that far off the rail. And he finished okay to finish fifth in there. He wasn't gaining any ground, but he was at least passing some tired rivals at the end. It's just, he needs to take another big step forward, and maybe he can do it. But it's hard to have confidence that Timberlake is going to progress. Others aren't going to step forward, and Common Defense is going to jump up 10 points. It's just a lot of things that need to go right for other horses aside from the favorites to win this race. And I just couldn't get there with some of the bigger prices. And I also don't know if Common Defense is really going to be 30-1. I think there's a better chance that Northern Flame and Common Defense are the same price than they're that far apart. So I just couldn't quite make the case that I would normally want to make for some clever horse in here.
Yeah, and just the last thing I'll say, I think I like Common Defense that day too, and he didn't do much. Timberlake, I tried to look up some horses that maybe Brad Cox had similar layoffs with for 3-year-olds. And the only one I was able to find was Essential Quality that really kind of matched. And he had no problem coming off the layoff and winning. So no negatives there. It wasn't a whole lot of positive because it wasn't much of a sample, but nothing that would make me want to be against him and think he's not going to be ready for a $1.25 million race, as you noted.
Yeah, and before we move on, Craig, I just want to mention one horse because I feel like he's a horse that could attract some support here as like an alternative, and that's the 6 Dymatic, because I think some people were taken by his maiden victory last time where he spooked in the stretch. That was the horse on Southwest Day where he kind of reacted to the tire tracks and veered out, and actually credit Joel Rosario for staying on that day and winning the race. Yeah, he probably could have won by more if not for that, but I think that's the kind of trip that you want to be careful with, because yes, he spooked a little bit. Maybe it cost him a length or two in the end, but this horse had gotten an absolutely perfect trip up until that point, saving every inch of ground, angling out at the perfect time to being produced. It's not like that was that strong of a maiden field. That's why he was 9-5 on that day. So I think he's one that people might like him based on that very obvious trouble in the stretch last time of his own doing. But I think you want to be careful upgrading a horse like that too much.
Yeah, and I mean, what was he going to run? He got a 98 from us. Was it 103? I mean, it still puts him a pretty big gap to the favorite.
All right, let's close things out with its maiden special weight race that ends the card. Race 12. It's going that same distance, popular distance during this pick 5 sequence, 1.1 miles, 4 in a row on the dirt for the 3-year-olds. And I guess we're going to have a pretty heavy favorite in here. I think he's even money on the line. The number 7, Crushed It, who going out for the Brad Cox barn. It does seem like they just bet these Brad Cox maidens with no limits. I mean, they all go off at very short prices, especially ones that have PPs that look like this. But they don't always win, Craig. I feel like there's actually a a better case be made that horses like this disappoint more often than not, and they're great horses to take shots against. And I think you see that with Crusted. He's been short prices twice in a row, and yeah, he's run well, and he's almost gotten there, but he hasn't sealed the deal. And his debut, you can make the argument he should have won because he was green that day and he was running after a more professional horse and just kind of was his own worst enemy. But last time out, he kind of should have won that race. Big favorite, had really things go his way. I mean, he was setting the pace, and yeah, it was an honest pace, but he just got run down at the end by a horse who has decent form coming into it. But I can't see myself taking a short price on this horse when I think there are cases to be made for others that have upside.
We're of similar thinking on this one. This horse has been beaten twice at low prices, as you know, 6-5 and 4-5. His speed figures, yeah, they're a little higher than everybody else, but it's not like there's not a bunch of horses in here who you could maybe expect to improve, and they're not all that far behind them. So I'm of a similar mind. I mean, he's probably going to be 4-5. It's just that Brad Cox always takes a lot of money in here, and I don't want a whole bunch of my ticket going through him. So I'll just talk about some of the others that I was interested in playing here. I'll start with the one horse, Sicilian Defense. Doesn't look like he did a lot of running the first time out. What caught my eye, though, is he really did take some money in that race. He was 9-2 in what was a decent race. And Cherie DeVoe just does a lot better second time out than she does first. I mean, I didn't look the stats up in Formulator, but there's a big enough gap in the TimeformUS trainer ratings from a 67 first out to a 94 second out that I know what I'm going to find. I'm going to see a lot of horses that ran better second time out. So don't want to dismiss that one. I would certainly use it. The two horse, Give Me a Reason. This is the one that's 3-1 on the morning line. I'm kind of against this horse too. His speed figures are okay. He's running in the 90s. He didn't take a step forward second time out. If he was a horse who was 10-1, I'd probably be a little more interested. But I'm trusting the morning line a little bit in here. I wouldn't be shocked if he were able to win here, but not one that I would be super interested in. The other horse that caught my eye, similar to the one horse, is the 3-horse Sitka, a colt who I think he is a colt, not a gelding yet. Very similar. Steve Asmussen can win first time out, but he often does better second time out than he does first time out. He does pretty well first time routing. The horse took some money behind Common Defense, who we were talking about earlier at Oaklawn Park. And I'm just looking for horses with upside. The 1 and the 3 both drew decent posts and think they could take a step forward. And it's not like it would have to be a giant step forward.
Yeah, I think those are 3 interesting horses to talk about when you're starting to look at alternatives to this favorite. Sicilian Defense is a horse I thought I was going to like until I started really looking. And then I didn't like anything I saw. That debut race at Gulfstream, it got a very low speed figure for that level. It just feels like a race that wasn't that strong. I mean, I looked up the field. It just felt like a rare Gulfstream maiden race in January that was just not, the quality wasn't there. And this horse probably does want to go longer. So I think that stretching out is going to help him. Interested with those stats though, Craig, because I did look them up in Formulator for Cherie DeVoe. And, I think that those quick looks in TimeformUS are a really great time-saving tool. I mean, I use them all the time, looking at the 0 to 100 ratings, how trainers do in different situations. And it's great to see the whole grid and, what trainers really do well. And it sort of is a great way to get a sense of what you should look up in Formulator after that, to get a sense of a trainer's stats and which horses make up that sample if you want to take that deeper dive. What's kind of interesting is Cherie DeVoe's got great stats with second-time starters on the turf. On the dirt, it's like totally opposite story. Her ROI is like 75 cents for $2. So that bothered me a little bit. But he's a horse that does have some upside. So, I mean, if he's a big price, I'm not going to talk anybody off a horse like that because I don't like the favorite in this race. I'm not as against Give Me a Reason as you seem to be. I mean, he faced good horses last time. Lat Long, who came back to be third in that Fairground Stakes, the Lecomte and Common Defense, who we already talked about, and he got a wide trip that day. He was still green. Boy, does this horse have some pedigree. Give Me a Reason. I mean, $500,000 as a yearling seems almost light for this horse's pedigree. I mean, Dream of Summer, that dam. I mean, she ran multiple 100 buyers. I think she was a graded stakes winner during her career, produced multiple grade 1 winners, Vexatious, Creative Cause, Destin, and amazing producer. Give me a reason. We don't know if he's that kind of horse yet, but between the two horses that are going to take the most money in here, which I view to be him and Crushed It, I kind of like Give Me a Reason a little more. I just think that there's more upside with this horse, that he's going to be a better price. So he would be the shorter price that I would lean on more. As for that other Asmussen runner, Sitka, I agree. I think of those 3 inside drawn runners, he's maybe the most interesting. Maybe just a horse that needed that debut race behind Common Defense. They rode him to the lead, wasn't quite quick enough to get there, got outrun a little bit, and then just sort of lost some position around the far turn, and no real trouble, but just stayed on at the end at one pace. The kind of race that I think, especially for Steve Asmussen, you can build on. And I was looking up an interesting stat for Asmussen. Dirt maiden second-time starters that are making their second starts in a rout. So horses that routed on debut and are routing again on the dirt. He's 20 for 82 with 24%, 223 ROI. And you kind of know, if you looked up the stats before, Steve Asmussen does not have good numbers with horses that are debuting in route races. So maybe this is one that just did need that race, and he's going to be more competitive this time. And before I throw it back to you, Craig, there's one horse in this race that I know is going to be a gigantic price that I'm really interested in. It's just a total bomb. And that's the number 4, Will Take It, going out for the Willis Horton Racing Stable, and this trainer they're using now, Eddie Milligan. Obviously, big pedigree on this horse, $700,000 by Tappet, that Take Charge Lady family. Look, it appears on paper he's done no running at all, but I would advise people to go back and watch both trips, because this horse has had no chance in either race. First time out, broke okay, but was sort of in mid-pack, and then just got hung out really wide around the far turn. He actually started to make a move, but as he was commencing that move, got pushed wider and wider, and then pushed out again by a horse who ended up doing some running on the stretch, and just didn't seem to have the fitness to really go on with it after that point. Last time out, though, is the trip you really should pay attention to, because that was that Dymatic maiden race on Southwest Day. And this horse was wearing blinkers for the first time, blinkers for the second time. He wore blinkers on debut as well. And notably, blinkers that are coming off after this race, because he got so aggressive heading for that clubhouse turn. Chris Landeros basically had to sit down in the stirrups to try to wrangle this horse from running up on heels, and he just bolted into that clubhouse turn, took out another horse in the process, and you can't make that kind of move and have success in a race. And he actually was traveling well into the race after that, and got caught behind a couple of tiring horses on the far turn, and you could see Landeros, after what happened on the first turn, just gave up. I mean, he was not going to exert any effort on this horse, but just watching those two races, I get the sense that there is way more ability to this horse than it looks on paper. And he's not going to get any attention. He's going to be a huge price in this race, especially with those two favorites taking all the money. And he just feels like the kind of 30 or 40 to 1 shot that could get in there as a bomb.
You mentioned the only other horse in the field I wanted to talk about, because frankly, I think there's a lot of filler in the field. Mm-hmm. There's some horses that are lower prices, and I just don't see it. There's a lot of horses with no speed, don't have speed figures, that match up with even the favorite, have run plenty of times. So I couldn't get there. I was looking for horses with upside, and frankly, they were the 4 inside horses. And I'm going to try to be Crushed It in this spot with those 4. Not sure exactly what tiers I'll have them all on. I imagine we'll discuss that when we recap.
Yeah, and in retrospect, maybe I'm being a little too hard on the 1, Sicilian Defense. It's a horse I can use somewhere. He's not my top pick by any means, but Cherie DeVoe is so dangerous. I feel like at prices, it's a mistake to be too critical of a horse like this. So as we talk a little bit, I think you convinced me to upgrade this horse a little bit, whereas at first I was getting a little too caught up in those stats and some of the things I saw in Formulator. There's nobody else I really wanted in this race. I agree, Craig. I mean, I started to try to make that same case about a third-time starter with upside for the number 10, Thousand Springs for Ken McPeak. Just watching this horse's races, I think he's a turf horse. He just has all turf on the dam side, and he's got that real high striding action. I think he's a horse that you want to watch for on the turf one day. I'm not sure this is the right race for him, but he, I guess, is another one that you could make that case has a little upside in his third career start. He was just not one that I really wanted to focus on in here.
Yeah, same for me. I saw that with the breeding, and also not a huge fan of the post, and just the no speed whatsoever has kind of turned me off on him.
All right, let's do our typical recap, and we'll discuss how we might play a sequence like this. It's not the easiest one to put together. I mean, I think we've established a couple of these races are real spread races for us, so you do have to narrow things down a bit, and it sounds like we might be able to do that in the Rebel. We don't love singling or really leaning on a horse that everybody else likes, but if you have creative enough opinions in the surrounding legs, I don't think it's the worst way to play.
No, I mean, this is a really tough sequence, as we talked about. And, unless you're going to spend a ton of money, which I'm not going to do, I'm going to narrow it down, and I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of money trying to beat a horse that I think is, I hate to use the word cinch, but he's a horse that I had trouble coming up with anybody else. I think if he loses, it's going to be because he just doesn't show up. So I'll just start with the Rebel and say, yeah, he's going to be my single in there. It would be very unlikely that I would even use another horse. In the carousel that we started about, I'll probably use 4 horses. My 2A horses, I would probably go with the one horse. Well, I would definitely go with the one horse, Adeline Julia. And I guess Mucho Macho Girl, who I trust a little bit more than Zeitlos, who is coming off that sloppy track win. I would use Zeitlos and I'm the Boss of Me as more BC type horses in here. So 2 A's and 2 others for me. In the Honeybee, I'm not against the favorite West Omaha, but certainly don't love her anywhere near as much as I do the favorite in the Rebel. I still think she's got a good shot to win, so I'm going to use her. Other horses that I'm interested in would be Alice Beach, Neome Beach, the 2 beaches. Maybe Tappet Genali, I could use as like a seahorse, maybe not. It's one I'm a little iffy on, and I could use her 10 in here as well, maybe as like a B or C type. But I do think the favorite's going to be tough, and one that I don't want to dismiss, like I've done a couple others in here. In the Razorback, another tough race, big 13-horse field. I'm going to key on horses. Seize the Night would be an A horse for me, and so would Notary. I just think both of them have upside. They have a little bit of, they won't get bet. They don't have the normal connections that we see that are going to take a lot of money in a race like this. And I think it's a pretty open race. I don't like the morning line favorite at all. Ain't Life Grand. I would definitely toss him. If I was going to use some underneath horses, I would probably use Speed Bias a little, but he'd be more like a C. I just don't trust him. I would use Magic Tap as a B type. And outside of that, it just depends. I could throw some of the long shots you mentioned. It just depends what my ticket's going to cost at this point. Covered the Rebel already. Definitely will be a single for me. And then that last maiden race, I'm going to lean on those first 4 horses. I'm not going to use the favorite in here. I would use the 1 and the 3 as my A's, the 2 and the 4 as more B-like types. But maybe even with the case you made for Will Take It, I could upgrade him because he's a horse who, I mean, if he was able to run and with the blinkers off really help him, he could blow up a pick 5 like this.
Well, for me, that first leg, the carousel, it's a tough one because I like 4 different horses, and I think I just have to sort of upgrade the horse that I like the most, and that's the number 1, Adeline Julia. So she'd be my A, and then the B's would be those 2 favorites, Mucho Macho Girl, Zeitlos, and then I'm the Boss of Me. So I'd kind of split it up that way, have 1 A and 3 B's in that leg. In the Honeybee, I'm going to do 2 A's in here. West Omaha, who is just really logical. And normally I would try to push a horse like that down to B status, but I do like her more than the other favorite. And I think she's a likely enough winner of this race that without having super strong opinions about the others, not feeling so confident in my other horse, I'll use her as an A, even though it's going against my usual philosophy on that. And then the other A is the long shot that I like, the 10, Midshipman's Dance, who I don't feel quite confident enough to use her so heavily and live or die with her, but I do think she's an interesting long shot in this race. And then I could use a little Band of Gold, I could use a little Neon Beach. I was having trouble getting a read on some of those mid-tier price horses in this leg. In the Razorback, this is a tough one because it's a spread race and I don't like to spread too much, but I'm going to spread with horses that none of which are going to vie for favoritism. Those would be the number 1, Seize the Night, the number 6, Midnight Rising, the number 11, Notary, and the number 12, Escapologist. They're sort of like my 4 key horses in this race, and that's a lot of key horses, but I mean, what are they, like 6 to 1, 30 to 1, 10 to 1, and 20 to 1 on the morning line? So I feel okay with that. And if I'm going to use some backups, if I even, can afford that, I mean, they would be, I guess, a horse like Magic Tap, who's just logical. He's sort of like one of those neutral impact horses on the value of this sequence. And I mean, even Speed Bias as a horse I could potentially throw in underneath. But I mean, it's, I would want to get through it with one of those 4 preferred horses that I already mentioned. In the Rebel, I don't like to just single horses. I rarely do it. I usually use some kind of backup, but I mean, Timberlake is the only A. And if I use any backup, it would be a C with a horse like Just Steel and Common Defense. I mean, they're Just Steel and Common Defense are the 2 horses that I was trying to make that case for to put on top of Timberlake, and I couldn't get there. So, I mean, I'll use them as C's on like my thin A ticket, but most of my play is going through Timberlake in this race. In the maiden special that closes things out, I'm going to key on the 2, 3, and 4. Give me a reason, Sitka, and we'll take it. And I'll downgrade that Brad Cox favorite, Crushed It. I mean, of course he can win this race, but I just think he detracts from the value of this sequence, and I'm against him enough that I want to leave him off. And then the horse that Craig likes a little more than I do, the number 1, Sicilian Defense, I could use him as a backup. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about structuring things. And Craig, it's one of those sequences where I don't love having that anchor opinion beyond Timberlake, where he is such a short price and he's everyone's single. But I feel like if you can get creative enough in some of these surrounding legs, and I think we've done that, where we like some prices in that Razorback, and we have somewhat counterintuitive thinking in the carousel, these sequences can still pay pretty well at the end of the day, even if Timberlake is the winner.
For sure, no doubt about it. Now, I think if you were going to key the favorites in the Honeybee, West Omaha and Timberlake, then you're starting to get into where you have to really get creative in the other legs. But I don't have an issue with really keying on one strong favorite if I think they're very likely to win. You could argue that even gives you the opportunity to spread and use some more horses that you actually like who are going to be prices.
Well, hopefully we gave out some good ideas that help you hit some prices in this sequence at Oaklawn Park on Saturday. Craig and I, of course, will be back next week to recap the Rebel and other action that takes place this weekend when we do the TimeformUS Pacecast. But looking forward to the sequence at Oaklawn Park on Saturday. It should be an interesting one, and looking forward to this Rebel Stakes and seeing how Timberlake comes back off that layoff, because if he wins impressively, he could be a major player heading on to the Kentucky Derby. So we'll see how that all transpires at Oaklawn Park on Saturday. Everybody, thanks for tuning in this week. Remember, you can always catch these TimeformUS podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. And Craig, have a great trip out to Arkansas this weekend.
Yeah, will do. If anybody sees me, come up and say hello. I promise I'm much nicer in person than I may appear to be on Twitter. And I'll have my wife Elsie with me, so I always have to be on my best behavior. And always love meeting new people out there. I'm sure I'll run into some people I already know. I've already reached out to them. But yeah, looking forward to it. It's been quite a while since I've been to Oaklawn.
Well, I hope you have a great time. I hope everybody has a great time watching this Rebel card on Saturday. Again, thanks for tuning in to the TimeformUS Forecast this week, and make sure to catch that Pacecast coming up next Tuesday, where we recap this weekend's action.